Just Eddie. Nice to meet you.
Eddie, like the swirls in the river water.
The movie opens with a wide establishing shot of a long river rolling over green hills. A man in fishing boots is shown with a fishing line walking through the river over rocks. A young boy is then shown fishing with his mother. His name is Augustine. As the narrator, Augustine explains his lifelong passion for fishing. As he grows up, he's shown using fishing as an escape in high school after he's laughed at by cheerleaders. Augustine describes his mother as fiery bait fisher, while his father is both a writer and a fly fisher. His younger brother, Bill Bob, however, hates water. The young boy is riding down the street on a bike, wearing a yellow rain jacket and boots to protect himself. He's a quirky kid. As a young man, Augustine helps his father set up for a book reading and signing. His father, Henning Hale Orveston, wrote a book about how he caught a legendary fish, junkie. Augustine calls his father H2O and explains that his father is the only one who calls him Augustine. He reveals he prefers the name Gus. Their relationship is obviously very strained as Gus thinks his father is pompous and doesn't understand him. As they go to the event, Gus sees a beautiful young woman in the square as he picks them up. The woman is wearing a fishing vest and teaching a young man how to cast a fishing line. The look on Gus's face is one of instant interest and attraction. He may have found the perfect woman. Before he can do anything, however, he's pulled away by his duties to his father. Luckily, as they set up, Gus finds the young woman listening to government official give a speech about building new dams. She claims the dams will disrupt the salmon ecosystem. She is clearly passionate about fishing and protecting the salmon. If Gus could talk to her, it could be a match made in heaven. While she struggles against being escorted out by security, she drops a retractable badge holder without noticing. Gus picks it up, then returns to his father. Later, Gus is building a fishing pole and writes Rodney on the side and thinks about leaving home while his parents argue. At dinner, Gus's parents begin arguing about a fishing book called The Complete Angler. Bill Bob is listening to music through earbuds at the table and Gus looks tired and irritated as the parents debate. Finally, Gus has enough and yells at his parents to stop. He yells at his father about his ego and calls his mother a selfish shrew. He says that neither of them knows anything about fishing or living. The mother abruptly hits him for his words. The younger brother stands up from the table, looking shocked and scared. And he should be. It's a hard moment to watch. Gus angrily wipes everything off the dining room table, pulls the famous Nijinsky fish from its mouth on the wall, and throws it into the fire. It doesn't seem like anything will be able to pull this family back together. Gus loads up a truck and leaves home. He goes to a small cabin on the river, and when he goes to the back porch and looks out over the river below, he has a huge grin on his face. He's right where he wants to be, and who wouldn't be? The area is so beautiful, it might make you want to live there too. Gus gets set up in the cabin and begins living his new life. He goes out to the river in the outfit we saw him wear in the opening of the movie. He's grinning and looks extremely happy as he catches a fish. Later at night, he works on creating fishing flies. He goes fishing again during the day and continues successfully catching fish in the beautiful river. He thinks about how he loves to fish trout, thinking of it as a dance, but how strange it is that he betrays his partners to catch them. It's a heavy subject to think about while fishing. Gus goes to a local fly shop to sell all the flies he's made and befriends a group of young kids. As he catches more fish over time, he eventually hesitates over killing one of them. He returns to his cabin with the fish still alive and sets up a tank for it. As he eats his dinner of fish, he apologizes to the captured fish, now named Alfred, and promises he'll eat something else tomorrow. It's a very sweet beginning to friendship. The next day, Gus goes canoeing through the misty river. He meets a man in a small motorboat that asks Gus if he's seen a lone fisherman, but Gus says he hasn't seen anyone. Later, Gus's lure catches on something large, and he pulls in the dead body of a missing fisherman. What a horrible surprise. Gus puts the dead body in the boat and drags the boat to a nearby dock. Exhausted, Gus falls asleep on the dock and is awakened that evening by a man named Titus, who gives him a ride. The two discuss mortality and souls as they ride. Titus gives him a telescope for clear vision before Gus leaves. Gus continues to wonder about mortality and is visibly shaken by the idea that he and everyone he knows will one day die. The discovery of the dead man has really darkened his wonderful new life. He flashes back to Bilbao with fondness, but is still upset about his ideas of death and souls. Frustrated, Gus burns his ideal schedule and his fishing maps as if it's all pointless. As Gus walks through the forest sometime later, he sees the young woman who was protesting the dams. He uses the telescope Titus gave him to see her better as she dives naked into the water. He leaves the telescope behind and walks towards her, pretending he didn't see her swim naked. After she gets dressed, he very awkwardly tries to introduce himself, fumbling over his words. He hides from her in a tree and quotes the complete angler at her. It's cringe-worthy, but despite his awkwardness, the woman laughs and introduces herself as Eddie. Eddie gets another bite on her pole, which she tosses into the water and swims after. When Gus chases after her, she's disappeared, but we see her find the telescope he left behind earlier. Gus takes Eddie's pole and runs into Titus again. Back at Gus's cabin, Titus tells him not to lose hope of finding Eddie again. He also suggests that if Gus teaches him to fish better, in return, Titus will teach him to philosophize to find meaning and love in his life. The next morning, the two go to Titus' apartment. Gus says that it doesn't matter what deity you believe in, they're not around when you really need them, so why should he believe in any of them? Titus tries to convince Gus that there's a soul. He says that a fisherman who is so patient when looking for a fish shouldn't be so quick to dismiss a soul just because he hasn't found it yet. Hopefully Gus won't give up. When Gus returns to his cabin, he finds that tank is open. The fish has jumped out of the open tank and died. Poor Alfred, and poor Gus. He's visibly upset over the death of his fish and appears to think about his conversations with Titus. Gus decides to track Eddie, but he's unsuccessful. He notices an old wrecked boat and saves a small fish he sees in the dirty water. Eddie is actually nearby and sees him from her truck. She uses his telescope to secretly watch him catch the fish. She seems touched as he sets it free in the wider river. Later, Titus and Gus play pool in a bar, and Titus compares Gus's relationship with his fishing pole to the relationship between creator and soul. He says that they are as oblivious to their creator as Rodney is to Gus, but that doesn't mean the creator doesn't exist. Gus has a stroke of luck and meets a famous fishing reporter he admires. The reporter asks to interview Gus after a successful catch. Everyone Gus knows reads the article, including his parents. Gus also asks Dutch to put a message to Eddie in the article, telling her he has her pole and would like to meet again. Thanks to the article, Gus becomes known as a fishing expert. He teaches the group of kids to fish, sells poles and flies, and gives advice to other fishers. His good life seems to be back on track. Eddie eventually catches up to Gus, meeting him at his cabin. She reveals that based on where he dropped his telescope and where he had come from, she knew he'd been watching her at the river. Gus admits he was, but not on purpose. He reveals that he thought she was beautiful and loved the carefree way she fished. He compares her to Titus and his little brother, and says that they were all love at first sight for him because of the way they looked at the world. The two go for a late-night walk, and Eddie admits she saw him save the trout in Portland. She also says she read his interview over and over. There's clearly mutual attraction, and the two share a kiss on a rock outcropping over the river. Could this really be love? Gus tells Eddie about leaving home, and we see a flashback of Gus's father catching Nijinsky. While H2O is fishing, Gus's mother accidentally snaps his line with her own bait, and he angrily stalks towards her before realizing she's a woman. She then manages to reel in Nijinsky herself, and the two bond over the experience. They agree to tell the story as if H2O caught the fish, and they begin their relationship together. It's tumultuous and loud, but Gus's parents do love each other. In the present, they comfort each other over the loss of their son. Love shows itself in unusual ways, doesn't it? The next day, Eddie sets Gus up to catch a huge fish with improper gear while she goes to Portland. Gus takes the challenge and follows the fish on his line down the river. He waits all night until the fish slowly begins to lead him back to its home. He realizes that he's following this fish with no hope of actually reeling it in due to the lightness of his line. This means there will be no betrayal of his dance partner and no struggle like he thought was necessary before. Eventually the fish stops and Gus gently unhooks it from the line, letting it go free. It feels like a profound experience for Gus. He falls asleep next to the river and awakens to beautiful sunlight streaming through the trees. He finds Eddie waiting for him against a tree. The two share another kiss and finally sleep together in a grassy field. Later, Gus's whole family shows up on the river and meet Eddie and Gus. His father willingly calls him Gus instead of Augustine, and everyone hugs. The family has been reunited. The movie ends with Gus narrating that people who talk about love don't really know what they're talking about. But you can compare it to a trout stream, which is only truly a stream if it's allowed to flow in its own place and at its own pace. Gus has finally found both love and meaning in his life. It's a serious plot with some truly bad dialogue, but the nature shots are gorgeous, and it gives such strong fall vibes. It will definitely put you in a nature-loving mood. I would recommend watching this movie if you love nature or are a fan of Amber Heard. Please don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe. Comment below what you want to see us work on next.